At 0140 hours local time, on a stretch of Ukrainian coastline that does not appear on any published naval chart, 5 low-profile hulls slid off a concealed boat ramp and into the black water of the Black Sea. There were no running lights, no radio chatter, no engine noise above a low electric hum. To anyone standing on the beach that night, it would have looked like nothing at all. 5 dark shapes the size of jet skis, sitting almost flush with the waterline, drifting out past the surf line, and then accelerating south into open water. These were Ukrainian unmanned surface vehicles, USVs, built for exactly one job: getting a several hundred-kilogram warhead within striking distance of a warship without anyone seeing it coming. Each hull carried barely 30 centimeters of freeboard above the waterline, a composite shell shaped specifically to scatter radar return instead of reflecting it, and a navigation suite that didn't need to talk to anyone once it left the coast. Satellite uplink, inertial guidance, and a low-light camera feed streamed back to a control room 200 kilometers away, where a small crew sat in front of monitors, watching 5 glowing trackers crawl slowly across a digital map of the Black Sea. The crew running the control room that night had rehearsed this exact profile more than a dozen times against simulated targets before ever being trusted with a live formation. Their job for the next 4 hours was almost entirely passive. Watch the feed, nudge the route when a hull drifted off its lane, and resist the urge to bunch the formation tighter than the plan called for, no matter how slow the spread felt on the screen. Patience, more than speed, was the actual weapon being deployed that night. The target wasn't a single ship, it was a patrol screen. 4 Russian Black Sea Fleet vessels operating in a loose protective formation roughly 90 nautical miles from the Crimean coast, tasked with one job of their own: keeping this exact kind of attack away from the anchorage behind them. A project. 22,160 patrol ship anchored the center of the formation, built specifically in the years before this war to handle exactly this kind of asymmetric threat. Small boats, drones, fast attack craft. Flanking it were 2 older Tarantula-class missile corvettes, fast and heavily armed, but designed in an era when nobody seriously planned for an enemy without a navy to send unmanned boats at them instead. On paper, this formation was not supposed to be vulnerable. The Tu-2160 carried a Pantsir-M close-in weapon system, a navalized version of the same point defense platform that was supposed to be turning Russian air bases into fortresses on land. Its radar could, in theory, pick up a target the size of a small boat at several kilometers. Its twin 30mm cannons could fire over 5,000 rounds a minute. If 5 USVs showed up on a radar screen in a straight line at a sensible distance, this formation would have shredded them before they got within 2 nautical miles. But the 5 hulls crossing the Black Sea that night were not planning to show up in a straight line, at a sensible distance, or anywhere close to where the Russian crews were trained to look. By 0230 hours, the USVs had covered roughly 40 nautical miles, running at a cruise speed just under 20 knots to conserve power for the final approach. At this distance, they were already inside the theoretical detection range of the patrol ship's surface search radar. And yet, on every screen in that formation, the sea ahead looked clean. This is the part of naval warfare that doesn't make it into the spec sheets handed to journalists. A surface radar doesn't see boats, it sees a return. A reflected signal bounced off whatever metal, fiberglass or wave crest happens to be sitting in its beam at that exact moment. A frigate-sized warship produces an enormous, unmistakable return. A US-5 with a hull deliberately shaped to deflect radar energy away from its source, sitting low enough that half its profile is hidden behind the curve of every passing swell, produces something closer to a flicker. Sometimes it's there. Sometimes the radar reads it as sea clutter. the exact same kind of noise produced by whitecaps, by floating debris, by nothing at all, and throws it away automatically so the operator isn't staring at a screen full of false alarms all night. That is the gap Ukraine's naval planners had been exploiting since the earliest months of this campaign, and it is precisely the gap this formation had been positioned, trained, and equipped to close. The 22,160's radar operators had standing orders to manually flag every unconfirmed return inside 15 nautical miles, no matter how small, no matter how likely it was to be nothing. It was a smart countermeasure against exactly this kind of threat. The problem was timing. A return that appears, vanishes behind a wave, and reappears 8 seconds later doesn't look like an inbound weapon. It looks like clutter doing what clutter does. And by the time enough of those flickers had repeated often enough, in a tight enough cluster, to be flagged as something worth real attention, the formation carrying them had already closed to inside 12 nautical miles. At 0247 hours, the duty officer aboard the patrol ship finally pushed an alert up the chain. Unconfirmed surface contacts, bearing northwest, possible small craft. It was the correct call. It was also roughly 40 minutes later than the textbook said it should have been. And against a target closing at speed, 40 minutes is not a delay. It's most of the available reaction time, already spent before anyone agreed there was anything to react to. Once the alert went out, the Russian formation did exactly what it was built to do. The Pantsir-M aboard the lead patrol ship rotated its radar dish toward the bearing, locked onto the strongest of the flickering returns, and began tracking. Both Tarantul corvettes increased speed and began maneuvering to open their own firing arcs. Their crews pulled from racks and bunks into combat stations inside minutes. On the bridge, orders went out to bring the AK-630 close-in guns to ready status. A weapon system built for exactly this scenario, capable of throwing a wall of 30mm shells into the water in front of an incoming target faster than almost anything else afloat. This is where the formation's training paid off, and where Ukraine's planners had built in their second layer of deception. The 5 USVs were not approaching as a single tight cluster. They had split roughly 6 nautical miles out, fanning into 3 separate approach lanes, 2 converging on the lead patrol ship from different bearings, 2 more arcing wide toward the nearest Tarantul corvette, and a 5th holding back as a lone, slow-moving decoy designed to look exactly like the most obvious threat on the screen. For a fire control radar built to track and engage one inbound target cleanly, a single missile or a single boat is a solvable problem. 4 or 5 separate, low, fast, erratically returning contacts approaching from different bearings at the same time is a different kind of problem entirely. Not a question of raw stopping power, but a question of which threat gets engaged first and how much of the radar's attention gets split between them. Every few seconds, the Pantsir-M's fire control computer had to decide: lock the decoy holding steady on the surface, or the contact closing fastest, or the pair converging together from the northwest. Every time it shifted priority, it lost a fraction of a second reacquiring whatever it had just stopped tracking. The decoy itself had been built for exactly this kind of confusion. It carried no warhead at all, just enough hull mass and onboard electronics to produce a radar signature close to its armed siblings, and it had been programmed to hold a steady, almost lazy course directly toward the patrol ship's bow. The single most obvious, most threatening-looking track on the entire screen. Every second the formation's radar operators spent locked onto that slow, steady, harmless contact was a second they weren't spending on the 4 hulls actually carrying a warhead. At 0254 hours, the lead patrol ship opened fire. The Pantsir-M's cannons sent a stream of tracer rounds, arcing into the dark toward the nearest contact, throwing up a wall of spray where the rounds struck water short of the target. It was, by any reasonable measure, an effective, well-trained response. It also missed. What followed was not a single decisive shot. It was 6 minutes of a defensive system, doing almost everything correctly, and still losing ground with every passing second. The Pantsir-M fired 3 more bursts in the next 90 seconds, walking rounds closer to 2 of the inbound contacts and forcing one to veer off course, trailing smoke from a near miss that clipped its outer hull without detonating its warhead. From the Russian side, that looked like a win, a confirmed disabling hit on an incoming threat, exactly what the system was built to deliver. But a near miss against an unmanned, expendable $30,000 hull is not the same trade as a near miss against a crewed warship worth tens of millions. Even a damaged USV that simply keeps moving forward, however slowly, is still doing its job. It doesn't need to survive the engagement. It only needs to survive long enough to matter. Meanwhile, the nearest Tarantul corvette had its own problem developing. The 2 contacts arcing toward it had widened their separation to nearly 400 meters, forcing its AK-630 gunners to choose between tracking one or sweeping back and forth between both. And every sweep cost time the closing range didn't allow for. At 02:57 hours, jamming began. A 4th Ukrainian asset, holding position well outside the engagement zone, began flooding the formation's communication and radar frequencies with electronic noise, not enough to blind the ships completely, but enough to add static, dropouts, and false returns into screens that were already struggling to separate 5 small threats from ordinary wave action. It is worth pausing here on what this jamming did and did not achieve, because it is the difference between a Hollywood version of electronic warfare and the real one. It did not blind the Pantsir-M. It did not stop a single weapon from firing. What it did was add friction. A half second of static here, a dropped track there, a return that flickered and had to be reacquired. At the exact moment when half a second was the entire margin the formation had left. By 0300 hours, 2 of the 5 inbound contacts had been destroyed outright by direct hits from the AK-630 batteries. A real hard-earned defensive success against a genuinely difficult target. A 3rd had been damaged badly enough to fall out of formation and drift to a stop, dead in the water roughly 2 nautical miles short of its target. On a debrief slide back at fleet headquarters, that would read as a 60% interception rate against an unconventional attack. It would also be true, and it would also not be the number that mattered. The 2 remaining USVs, one from the pair that had targeted the lead patrol ship, one from the pair that had split toward the Tarantul corvette, had spent the entire engagement doing the one thing their design was built around: staying low, staying erratic, and using every second the formation spent tracking decoys and damaged sister craft to keep closing range. At 0302 hours, the first impact came against the Tarantul corvette's port side, roughly amidships, just below the waterline. The explosion wasn't large by warship standards, a few hundred kilograms of explosive charge, nowhere near the size of an anti-ship missile warhead. But it didn't need to be large. It needed to be in the right place, and it was. The blast tore open the outer hull plating below the waterline and ruptured an adjacent fuel bunker, and within seconds, the corvette had taken on a visible list, seawater pouring into compartments never designed to flood that fast. 90 seconds later, the second hit landed against the lead patrol ship's stern quarter, close to the aft superstructure. This impact caused less structural damage, but tore through exposed antenna mounts and external cabling, knocking out the ship's surface search radar and a portion of its communications suite in the same instant. For the next several minutes, the most capable vessel in the formation, the one purpose-built to counter exactly this kind of attack, was effectively blind on its own radar, relying on visual lookout and shouted reports relayed from the bridge wing, while damage control teams worked to restore power to backup systems. This is the part of the engagement that doesn't get captured cleanly in an after-action report, because it isn't really about either ship sinking. The corvette didn't go down. The patrol ship didn't lose propulsion. Both vessels, in the strictest sense, survived the night. But for nearly 20 minutes, the formation that existed specifically to detect and destroy small unmanned threats before they got close had one ship listing and fighting flood damage, another ship running blind on radar, and a command structure trying to coordinate a response over a communications net that jamming had already degraded before the impacts ever landed. The formation hadn't been sunk, it had been switched off. By 0310 hours, with both damaged ships now broadcasting distress traffic and requesting tow support, Fleet Command, roughly 70 nautical miles away, was working off incomplete information, relayed in fragments through a single corvette whose own radar was only partially restored. Orders to reposition the undamaged vessels into a defensive perimeter took nearly 15 minutes to confirm received, not because anyone was slow to act, but because the simplest part of naval combat, knowing exactly where every friendly ship is and what condition it's in, had become genuinely difficult in the middle of an active threat picture nobody could fully see anymore. This is the same pattern that has shown up again and again across this entire campaign, on land and now at sea. The most damaging strikes are rarely the ones that destroy the most expensive piece of equipment in the picture. They're the ones that quietly remove a formation's ability to see itself, talk to itself, and coordinate its own response, while the hardware itself is still mostly standing. A warship with a working hull and a blind radar is, for the duration of that blindness, not meaningfully different from a warship that isn't there. By first light, both damaged vessels were under tow, escorted back toward Sevastopol by the two corvettes that had escaped the engagement undamaged. The patrol formation that had been guarding this stretch of water the night before no longer existed in any operational sense, not because it had been destroyed, but because two of its four ships were no longer combat capable, and the remaining two had spent the morning escorting them home instead of patrolling anything. Militarily, this was not a single dramatic sinking, and Russian state media would have every reason to describe the night as a successful defense. Two unmanned threats destroyed outright, a third disabled before impact, no vessel lost. Every one of those claims would be technically accurate. What that framing leaves out is the part that actually matters strategically: a four-ship patrol screen, purpose-equipped with the exact close-in defense systems designed to stop this kind of attack, was reduced to two operational vessels by a strike that cost a fraction of what a single anti-ship missile would have, using hardware that doesn't require a single sailor to risk their life in the attacking force. That is the deeper pattern behind every engagement like this one. Ukraine does not need to sink the Black Sea Fleet ship by ship to change how that fleet operates. It only needs to make every patrol, every anchorage, and every transit route expensive enough, in ships pulled out of service, in formations forced to stretch thinner, in radar operators forced to treat every flicker on a screen as a potential threat, that the fleet's freedom to operate close to the Ukrainian coast keeps shrinking. Every patrol ship sent home under tow is a patrol ship that isn't covering open water somewhere else. Every formation forced to slow down and double-check sea clutter is a formation reacting later to the next attack than the one before it. This is what a campaign of denial looks like when it isn't built around a handful of headline strikes, but around dozens of nights exactly like this one, most of which never make it into a news cycle at all. The Black Sea was never going to be cleared by a single decisive battle. It is being made unaffordable, one patrol formation at a time. There is also a quieter financial logic underneath all of this that rarely gets mentioned in coverage of any single engagement. A Project 22,160 patrol ship cost its builders somewhere in the range of $100 million to put to sea. The 5 hulls launched against it that night, combined, cost a fraction of that. Cheap enough that losing 3 of them outright to count as a successful interception still represented a lopsided trade in Ukraine's favor the moment 2 hulls got through. War has always been partly a numbers game, but unmanned systems have changed, which numbers actually decide who can keep affording to fight it. Thank you for watching until the end of this video. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. After watching how this patrol formation handled a coordinated unmanned strike, do you think Russia's Black Sea fleet will pull further back from the Crimean coast, invest in better close-in radar discrimination, or keep absorbing losses like this one indefinitely? Let us know what you think, and thank you for supporting this channel.